Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 21, Text 13. Rishir Uvacha Jushtam Batadya Khila Satvarashehe Sam Siddhyamakshno Darshananaha Yad Darshanam Janmabhir Idya Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha Jushtam Batadya Khila Satvarashehe Samsiddhyamakshno Stava Darshananaha Yadarshanam Janmabhir Idya Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha Jushtam Batadya Khila Satvarashehe Sansiddhyamakshno Darshananaha Yadarshanam Janmabhir Idya Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha. Shiruvacha Jushtam Patadya Kila Satvarashe Samsiddhyamakshno Stava Darshananaha Yadarshanam Janmanvir Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha. Rishiruvacha Jushtam Bhatyadya Kila Satvarashehe Samsiddhyamakshno Stava Darshananaha Yadarshanam Janmabhir Idya Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha. Rishiruvacha Jushtam Bhatyadya Kila Satvarashehe Samsiddhyamakshno Stava Darshanamnaha Yadarshanam Janmabhiridya Sadbhir Ashasate Yogino Ruddha Yogaha. Rishi Uvacha. The great sage said, Jushtam is attained, Bata, Adya, now, Akhila, all, Sattva, of goodness, Rashehe, who are the reservoir, Samsiddhyam, the complete success, Akshnoho, of the two eyes, Tava, of you, Darshanat, from the sight, Naha, by us, Yat, of whom, Darshanam, sight, Janmabhihi, through births, Idya, O worshipable Lord, Sadbhihi, gradually elevated in position, Ashasate, aspire, Yoginaha, yogis, Ruddha Yogaha, having obtained perfection in yoga. Translation. The great sage Kardama said, O supreme worshipful Lord, my power of sight is now fulfilled, having attained the greatest perfection of the sight of you, who are the reservoir of all existences. Through many successive births of deep meditation, advanced yogis aspire to see your transcendental form. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described here as the reservoir of all goodness and all pleasure. Unless one is situated in the mode of goodness, there is no real pleasure. When, therefore, one's body, mind, and activities are situated in the service of the Lord, one is on the highest perfectional stage of goodness. Kardama Muni says, Your Lordship is the reservoir of all that can be understood by the nomenclature of goodness, and by experiencing you face to face, eye to eye, the perfection of sight has now been attained. These statements are the pure devotional situation. For a devotee, the perfection of the senses is to engage in the service of the Lord. The sense of sight, when engaged in seeing the beauty of the Lord, is perfected. The power to hear, when engaged in hearing the glories of the Lord, is perfected. The power to taste, when one enjoys by eating prasad, is perfected. When all the senses engage in relationship with the personality of Godhead, one's perfection is technically called bhakti yoga, which entails detaching the senses from material indulgence and attaching them to the service of the Lord. When one is freed from all designated conditional life and fully engages in the service of the Lord, one's service is called bhakti yoga. Kardama Muni admits that seeing the Lord personally in bhakti yoga is the perfection of sight. The exalted perfection of seeing the Lord is not exaggerated by Kardama Muni. He gives evidence that those who are actually elevated in yoga aspire in life after life to see this form of the personality of Godhead. He was not a fictitious yogi. Those who are actually on the advanced path aspire only to see the eternal form of the Lord. And again, the translation. The great sage Kardama said, O supreme worshipful Lord, my power of sight is now fulfilled, having attained the greatest perfection of the sight of you, who are the reservoir of all existences. Through many successive births of deep meditation, advanced yogis aspire to see your transcendental form. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are continuing reading in Srimad Bhagavatam, and we're reading this very wonderful pastime of Kardama Muni as he's engaging in rather intense processes in order to have darshan of the Lord. And I think it's an interesting passage because it shows the level of difficulty that one actually needs to undergo in order to see the Lord, right? Of course, we know anything of value requires difficult endeavor, right? We know, again, as we always see around us every day, we see everyone is getting up, not that early, but for them it's very early, based on how late they're going to sleep, right? They're going to bed late and they're waking up early, working very hard and driving here and there, right? In order to obtain the glories of, to pay for their TV or something, right? So they're working very hard, right? People are working very, very intensely with a lot of effort. And that effort is showing the value of what they have, right? And so we can see, right, how valuable it is, right, to watch movies and to see television and, eat nice food and all of these things, right? And they are valuable, right? So of course this material work is not really worth all that much, right? They're able to purchase some things, and if they're very intelligent, if they're very studious, if they're very pious, and they go to the right temples at the right time, they do all these sort of things, maybe then they'll have something very nice, being born in a heavenly planet somewhere, right? And they'll put all of that effort in, and it is a lot of effort. If you, I think most of us have been to Mayapur, and you'll see Bhaktividya Purna Maharaj's Gurukul, right? And you'll see they're following very strictly all of these sort of smriti shastras and all, which is what are required, right? In order to obtain. People will think, maybe I'll have a demigod birth, I'll be a good person. But to be a good person is not so cheap a thing, right? To be a good person is actually very, very difficult. If you read how regulated all of it is. I know one of my friends, they were recently in India and they were staying at one of the ISKCON farms there, right? And here in Australia, we have a little bit of the manpower issue, right? There's the vision and there's the purity of the devotees, just the manpower issue, right? But the manpower issue is not an issue over there. So over there he was saying he was seeing how all the devotees were. And he said he genuinely felt like an animal, right? Being there at the farm, seeing how the devotees are there, right? Following, not even fully the Smriti Shastras, right? Still, of course, they're following the freedom that the Bhakti Marg gives us to a degree, right? But even just seeing some basic implementation of genuine Vedic culture, of some genuine mode of goodness, he said, I felt like I was an animal, right? I felt embarrassed to be there. Only by the mercy of the devotees I felt comfortable, right? But actually thinking about how I normally live my life, the sort of culture that I'm used to living, the sort of mindset I'm used to having, I just felt like an animal. I felt these were human beings, and for the first, not for the first time, but for the first time I'm living in a society, built by human beings. So this is the intensity, right? That we can feel, not even, right? Because the goal of Krishna consciousness is not to establish the Smriti Shastra society, right? It's not to re-establish a society built on Manu Samhita, right? This is, when Srila Prabhupada discusses Varnashram, he's describing it in relation to preaching. You'll often hear this. When Prabhupada describes the farm projects, he says, when society progressively gets worse and worse and worse, these farm projects will be places of stability, right? These will be places and people will be attracted to them. In fact, in one place, Srila Prabhupada even says, when the farms grow, there will even be a section on the farms where people can eat meat. He said, not because we are here to encourage meat eating, but rather these will become societal shelters, right? So it's there for preaching, right? And so there'll be a section away from the main devotees. I was hearing this in a seminar that was given on the farm communities, and I thought it was really fascinating, right? This is Srila Prabhupada's vision, right? As society becomes more and more degraded, the only hope, really, will be some semblance of Vedic society, of Varnashram, in modern society. And therefore, there'll be some section. Obviously, there won't be slaughterhouses or anything, but we know Prabhupada says that there'll always be a class of person who will wish to consume meat, and they can perform some sort of sacrifice and eat the remnants from that, right? So there'll be some section of the farms away from the devotees, sort of pushed off to the corner, swept under the rug, where this can even happen, right? So of course, I'm saying that all to say it's not that we are the International Society for Varnashram Consciousness, but we are the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and Varnashram is a very powerful method for establishing Krishna consciousness. And therefore, to be good, to be in the association of good people, or even to become a good person is no cheap thing. People think of it as very simple, right? Oh, well, maybe I won't be so spiritual, but at least I'm a good person, right? But being a good person, actually, this is the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's easier to be a spiritual person than a good person now. We might not be a good person, but at least we can chant Hare Krishna, right? At least I think that's my back door out. So we find that to be a good person, to be situated in these valuable things is not so cheap, right? So to be a good enough person, to become a demigod, right? Well, this is very hard, right? It's sometimes said, of course, I always have this issue whenever we explain the yoga ladder through Bhakti Shastri, right? I'll always see that sometimes I'll see that always there'll be one or two students who they're hearing the karma yoga thing and they're thinking, actually that doesn't sound too bad, Maybe I'll do this karma yoga thing, this bhakti yoga is bhakti yoga something, but I didn't know there was options, Why didn't you tell me about this? You're telling me to chant. I didn't know I have all these different things I can choose from. Why were you trying to railroad me into bhakti yoga, There's jnana yoga, there's ashtanga yoga. I like yoga studios, Why am I sitting down chanting, right? So often we'll see this, right? I always have to make this point, right? You don't realize karma yoga is not such an easy thing, Bhakti yoga is infinitely easier, actually. Infinitely greater, but infinitely easier. And because really, karma yoga in this day and age is almost impossible, right? What does it mean to actually do karma yoga? What does it mean to actually do one's duty? To do one's duty implies a society where it's possible to be done, These days, whenever I speak to Grihastha devotees, they're struggling to even, in a genuine way, not in an excuse-finding way, but they genuinely struggle to make a living without somehow making money from meat eating or something. Not that they're eating meat, but if they're doing some sort of work, the amount of times I've heard Grihastha devotees will tell me is they're struggling now because if they're not taking clients who are asking them to make a website for some, steakhouse or something, then they're running out of clients, right? It's difficult, right? So what to speak then of doing one's duty, right? It's becoming difficult to not be implicated even in sinful activities, let alone then to be able to successfully do a good thing, right? So karma yoga, it's one of those things that's sort of like, oh no, what an unfortunate case. I guess we'll just have to do bhakti then, right? This is the mercy of Kali Yuga again, right? Kali Yuga, both the people are not qualified to do karma yoga, but nor is the society. Our only qualification is to take to bhakti yoga under Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right? Because again, Mahaprabhu has come to give this, not because this is the greatness of the Kali Yuga souls, but because this is the mercy of Mahaprabhu. He has come to give this very high thing to the most fallen. But anyways, so to be a good person and to achieve even some demigod birth, that is beyond our scope of how much work we can do. In one sense, I was being sarcastic, but in another sense, I was being sincere, right? It is actually very, very valuable to be able to watch a TV and waste your life, right? It's very, very valuable. Because what value we have to offer in Kali Yuga is very, very little, right? If we give an average Kali Yuga life, it's not worth much, right? But Srila Prabhupada, he's mentioned very nicely here, right? How any life can be worth something, right? And that is through appreciation of the Supreme Lord, right? And the inverse is true as well. We're hearing here that the perfection of the eye is to see the Supreme Lord, right? Therefore, the wasting of the eye is what? To not see the Supreme Lord. This is the unfortunate condition of myself and many others, right? Who have had the great fortune to come into contact with this Krishna consciousness movement, right? Because we're given the opportunity to use our eyes to read Srila Prabhupada's books and therefore interact with Krishna in the most meaningful way that we can, right? We are given the opportunity to hear Srila Prabhupada's lectures. Again, this is one of those things, as terrible as the Industrial Revolution and all that it caused was, it's given us the mercy of the technology that we can still hear the transcendental sound vibration of Srila Prabhupada's voice, right? We can have all sorts of ways we can offer through the parampara, through Srila Prabhupada, we can offer bhoga and therefore relish prasad, right? We have all of these opportunities. And yet, it's so very unfortunate that we still have this desire that maybe I'll read a newspaper, right? Maybe I'll read about King Charles III. Maybe I'll read about this and that, right? Maybe I'll listen to some music, right? Maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. I could be listening to all of these things, right? This is the foolishness of the Kali Yuga situation. Because even though we have no ability to even earn the opulences of demigod position, right? The opulences of even a good position materially, right? Practically speaking. Even though with this Kali Yuga birth, it's a little bit heavy, I'm sorry, but even though we have this, we don't have the capacity for it, we are still so mercifully given the opportunity. And yet, at least I can definitely speak for my case, we don't take it, right? We have so many opportunities to think about Krishna even, right? Even if every other of our senses is taken away, still by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we have heard enough that we can think about Krishna. And yet what do we think about? At least I think about, I have this SAG, right? I wonder, I wonder what's going on here, I wonder what's going on there, right? I wonder what's going on in the news, I wonder what's going on here, right? We'll use all of these senses, and therefore we wasted them, right? Jesus Christ has this saying where he says that if one uses their eye to lust after a woman, they should pluck it out, right? Because what use is an eye if it's being used for such a useless purpose, right? Jesus says one should pluck it out, but I would say, not to add on to what Jesus said, but I would say more so, we may as well have plucked it out, right? What is the point of an eye? Srila Prabhupada has said the perfection of the eye is to have darshan of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? But if the eye is not being used for that perfection, then it may as well have been plucked out, right? It's just worthless. It's a worthless eye just existing, just there, being wasted, right? Anyway, so Srila Prabhupada, he'll use this example, right, of the screw, right? The screw for the vending machine that's meant to be screwed into it, right? What is the point of the screw on the floor? It's just dirt. One of our professors, he was actually making an interesting point. He had a coffee cup, because of course he's not a devotee, right? And he had a coffee cup and he put it on the table. And he said, "Is this dirt?" And we said, "No," right? And then as he was going through the lecture, he finished it. And when he finished the coffee cup, he said, "Is this dirt?" And then he said, "Well, yes, now it is, right? But why is it dirt? That cup didn't change. The cup didn't change at all." And then at the end, because some people still said, "No, it's not dirt," then he put it on the ground, right? He put it on the ground and he said, "Now is it dirt?" And then everyone agreed it's dirt. Why is it dirt? It's dirt because now it has no purpose to serve anymore. The whole reason it was considered non-dirty, the whole reason it was considered valuable, was because he could take something from it, right? There was a purpose to its existence. Once it was removed from its purpose, then it becomes dirt, it becomes filth, it becomes worthless, right? Same too for the eyes that do not see the Supreme Lord, that do not read Srila Prabhupada's books, that do not read Shastra, that do not have darshan of the Vaishnavas, right? Same too for the ears that are not hearing Kirtan, hearing Harikatha, so on and so forth, right? So in this way, all of these things become worthless and they become useless, right? So, Kardama Muni, he is showing, by his engagement in intense austerity, right, in order to see this, right? In order to see this, he's engaged in intense activity and he's showing the value, right, of darshan of the Supreme Lord, right? It is not such a cheap thing, right? By working so hardly in a way that that could have been done back in the day, right? He's showing this is the level of intensity that needs to be undergone, right, in order to have darshan of the Supreme Lord. And so there we see how valuable darshan of the Supreme Lord is. Of course, it is the utmost valuable thing, because it is the thing that gives anything else value. This is the point. The senses only have value when they are relating to Krishna, right? Otherwise they become valueless. Not only is Krishna the most valuable thing, Krishna is the only valuable thing. Because anything only has value insofar as it connects to Krishna. In the same way as that coffee cup, right? Anything that becomes utilized for Krishna then has value. But apart from Krishna, it's useless. This is the message of the Chatur Shloki of Bhagavatam, right? Nothing not connected to Krishna is real, right? Not in a Mayavad sense, but in the sense that what reality does it have? It's valueless. So it's not even that Krishna is the most valuable thing. It's that Krishna is the only valuable thing. Nothing is valuable apart from Krishna. And anything that is valuable because of its connection to Krishna. So here, Kardama Muni, he is reflecting this, right? By his attempt for yoga, right? What is yoga, right? This is one of the classic, first things you learn when we begin to become educated into Krishna consciousness, right? Yoga comes from yukta, right? It comes from the idea to yoke, to connect, right? That's actually where we get the English word from, to yoke. When you yoke two animals together, you connect them by the neck because they're being connected. So yoga, right? Yoga is the connecting process. Yoga is the process by which something becomes valuable because it becomes connected to something of value. Yoga is the means by which the senses become valuable, by which the individual becomes valuable, because now it becomes connected. Anything apart from Krishna is worthless and valueless. But when one undergoes the yogic process, then they begin to bring value to something because they're connected to Krishna. So in this way, we're seeing this, right? So Kardama Muni, he's showing this, the transcendental position, the transcendental value of Krishna. And we know Krishna is so very valuable, right? And we hear this in Gita, right? This is the fulfillment of all yogic processes, right? Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadyante Vasudevam Savamiti Sa Mahatma Su Durlabhaha, right? We're hearing this after so many births, right? One will eventually realize that Vasudev, right? He is the source of all. And actually, this is what Baladev Vidyabhushan says about the Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra is, very, very complex. If anyone tries to read it, I just don't try to read it. I tried once, and it's very intentionally difficult. The Sutra genre, we see this also in the Upanishads. Even Ishopanishad, if you read the word for word, you think, what's going on, What's going on here? You get so grateful for the Bhaktivedanta purports when you read Ishopanishad, because you think this is meaningless, right? And the Upanishads and the Sutras, they're unique because their whole genre is showing Vedic culture, because the Sutras are made to be explained by a guru. We're so used to this book culture, we go to a book and we read it and it makes sense to us. But in Vedic culture, you didn't learn anything apart from a guru, right? So sutras intentionally, they're very difficult to understand because they weren't meant to be read and heard to be understood. They were meant to be read and heard to be explained by the guru, so the guru could explain the complexities of it. And that's why we see Ishopanishad sometimes it actually doesn't make sense, He does not move, but he is faster than all running. What does that mean, On its own, that's a meaningless statement. But being unpacked by the guru, then suddenly it has so many levels of meaning, right? So the Vedanta Sutra is like this, and it's very complex philosophy, right? We know Srimad Bhagavatam is written as a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra in a sense, right? It is the only commentary we need on the Vedanta Sutra. It unpacks the Vedanta Sutra. But Baladev Vidyabhushan, he says, one has understood the whole purpose of the Vedanta Sutra if they understand one thing. If they understand this, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti. If one understands that Vasudev, he is the source of all things, right? Then one is set, one has learnt all the knowledge they need to learn from this esoteric text. Therefore we hear, Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis, right? We hear this in the Shikshashtakam. Mahaprabhu, he's speaking about this, and he's speaking about all of the many names that Krishna has, right? There's so many countless names. And Mahaprabhu, he glorifies this. And we know he's been glorifying this for a while. After meeting Ishvara Puri, we know Mahaprabhu, he goes under a little bit of a career change, right? He decides to repurpose his careers, right? He thinks, maybe this Nyaya scholarship thing isn't really for me, Maybe I'll take up this preaching of Krishna consciousness. And we know one of the first things he did was he would explain all of these different names, all of these grammatical terms, everything. He would explain them in relationship to Krishna. And this is another concept we hear. We hear, I think in the Vedanta Sutra, we hear it, that actually all of the names, especially the names of the demigods, are simply names of Krishna, right? This is why Madhvacharya, he actually holds a slightly different view, or at least the followers of Madhvacharya, they do. They hold a slightly different view to Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya we follow with our understanding of there's the Jnana Kanda, there's the Karma Kanda, and there's the Upasana Kanda, right? They're the three sections of the Vedas. But Madhvacharya says while that distinction can be made, ultimately the whole purpose of the Vedas is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because ultimately when we're praying to Agni, when we're praying to Vayu, all of these names are given to the demigods, but originally they're Krishna's. Actually at its heart, all of the Vedic literature is Upasana Kanda. It is all about worship, and it is all about worship of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because to Krishna belong all the names. And therefore Mahaprabhu, when he's chanting the Shikshashtakam, he says this, right? You have hundreds and thousands, countless of names, right? That it's not just an empty glorification, it's a substantial glorification. Why? Because anything that exists only has value and only has substance if it relates to Krishna. Even names, they only have value and they only have purpose because they relate to Krishna. The demigod's position only has value, it only has purpose because Krishna has related it to them. Right? The demigods are, as we know, Prabhupada would often give the wonderful description of like a government, right? They're all the ministers, but their power doesn't come from themselves, right? In that sense, we can say the recent politics has been relevant. It's like a constitutional monarchy, right? Australia has a government with all of these positions, but all of that is validated only by the crown, right? All of the positions are only validated by the inherent value the crown has, and the crown has an inherent one, right? Same with Krishna. Krishna has the inherent value, and everything else only has value as Krishna accords it out. And therefore, you have countless names. Mahaprabhu says this. Again, it is glorification, but it's glorification deeply rooted in philosophy. And we know, actually, it's a little side. No, I have time for a little side note, right? We know there's the primary and secondary names, right? There's primary names of Krishna and there's secondary names of Krishna. The secondary names, they relate to, what do they relate to? Yeah, they relate to creator, destroyer, how Krishna relates to the world, right? So, Paramatma, Ishvar, right? All of these sort of names are secondary names. And then, of course, primary names are how Krishna relates unto himself, right? How Krishna relates in his pastimes. Govinda, Keshava, Krishna, right? These are the primary names. This is a little bit tangential, but it's an interesting point because Juggernaut then, we know Juggernaut is such a great name, but what sort of name is Juggernaut? Jagat-nath, right? Lord of the universe, Lord of the world, right? Jagat-nath should be, well, it should be a secondary name. And yet we see Mahaprabhu would chant Juggernaut all the time. So this is a little interesting, right? And not only would he chant it all the time, but when was Mahaprabhu chanting Juggernaut? He was chanting the name of Juggernaut at the Ratha Yatra. What was a Ratha Yatra? I won't get too rasic, I promise. But the Ratha Yatra is very inherently rasic. It's the most rasic pastime, you could say. I've heard from some sadhus, they'll say that we see, that Mahaprabhu's leelas, they relate to Krishna's leelas. And they sometimes say that the Ratha Yatra is like the Ras Leela of Mahaprabhu's pastimes, right? Obviously different because Mahaprabhu's pastimes are less, not like the Ras Leela where we should close our ears if we hear anything past the mention of the name, right? Not like that. They're a little more open, a little more accessible, but they say there's that same level of intensity. It is in the Ratha Yatra where Mahaprabhu really begins to identify as Srimati Radharani, right? That's where he starts these very elevated things, right? So it's interesting, right? Why Mahaprabhu, he's using a secondary name, not a primary name, right? In such a elevated situation, in such an elevated experience. Why is he then coming down and talking about, you're the creator of the world, you're the Lord of the universe, right? Because we know the secondary and the primary names are greater. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says this. They're more conducive to our sadhana, right? So therefore, also to come back to the Shikshashtakam, when Mahaprabhu says you have so many countless names, he's not saying you have so many countless names, so chant whatever. Prabhupada would say you can chant Allah, Buddha, Yahweh, whatever you want, right? And that's true, right? But that just because there are many names you can chant doesn't mean that all the names are equally potent, right? Especially the name Krishna, right? Especially the name Krishna is so very potency filled. But then why? Why is Mahaprabhu chanting Juggernaut? It's a little bit of an interesting question. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he says in one class, he says the reason why is because the name Juggernaut, right? Jagannath Puri is an interesting dham. I sometimes mention this in Bhagavatam classes as a point I like to come back to because I find it interesting, right? Because Jagannath Puri is filled with Aishwarya and also filled with Madhurya. It's an interesting dham. You see both moods are present there, right? It's Sri Jagannath Puri Dham. It's very opulent, right? There's Jagannath, right? The Lord of the universe, right? We see the Ratha Yatra. There's so much opulence. And yet we also hear it is Gupta Vrindavan. It is a hidden Vrindavan, filled with all of that mellow, right? It's interesting. Vrindavan is just straight up full Madhurya, right? You feel that, I always feel if I stay too long in Vrindavan, I think, okay, now I have to go, I don't belong here, I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, right? You can feel that, right? When you go, especially in Krishna Balaram Mandir, if you ever, have the fortune of attending Mangal Aarti at Krishna Balaram Mandir, you can feel it on your shoulders, You feel you're in a very heavy place, right? So all of that sweetness, all that Madhurya, it's present there in Jagannath Puri Dham, right? But so is that Aishwarya. This is very confusing. So Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he says that there is a river of prem flowing through the spiritual world. And whenever there is a river, there are two banks of a river, right? There is one embankment and there's another one, right? Otherwise it's not a river, it's the ocean, right? That's the nature of the river. And the two embankments of the river of Prem are the embankment of union and the embankment of separation. Right? There is Prem, love for Krishna, in the mood of being associated with Krishna, and there is the Prem in the mood of separation. Vrindavan is Prema in the mood of union. But Jagannath Puri is the embankment of Prema in the mood of separation. And therefore, you'll sometimes see Jagannath Puri is called Vipralamba Kshetra. It's called the Kshetra of separation. Now, what does that have to do with Jagannath being a secondary name? Gaur Govinda Maharaj says the reason why Jagannath is used is because Aishvarya, at its most intense, right? When a devotee is not in an established mood, then Aishvarya can become one's predominant mood. But when one is established in their mood, when there's nothing that one will do to move one's mood, right? We hear about this. Lakshmi would not enjoy to be in Goloka Vrindavan. Mahaprabhu makes this point because she is fixed in her mood, right? Vaikuntavasis would be confused in Goloka, right? Vaikuntavasis wouldn't know what's going on. They would be thinking, what's going on, you know? Where's the Supreme Personality of Godhead? I can't see him anymore. Actually, I heard once from one sadhu, there's one pastime, I don't know what Shastra is from, it must be from a Goswami Grantha or something. But one senior sadhu was saying, once there was one pastime where Krishna showed a vision of Vaikuntha to all the Brajvasis. They all said, wow, let's go there, you know, that looks like a nice place. It looks so nice. But of course, if they would have gone there, they wouldn't have enjoyed it so much, right? Because they would have been confused. What is everyone doing here, right? So anyways, there's a sweetness of the mood. So, but because when the mood is established and it can't actually be adjusted anymore by other moods, then Aishvarya begins to do something different. Then Aishvarya no longer acts to change one's mood, but it acts to intensify it. Because when one experiences Aishvarya, they feel more distant from that Madhurya conception of Krishna, right? So this is why Mahaprabhu, he's relating to Juggernaut, because Juggernaut is manifesting that principle, right? We know Kurukshetra in Krishna book, right? We read a Kurukshetra, Krishna met the gopis, and they were so upset, right? They're upset because this isn't the Krishna we know. This isn't the sweet Krishna with the peacock feather and the flute. This is Krishna with an armor and a chariot, right? They were very upset. Why? Because that Aishvarya was there. But did that Aishvarya lower their mood? It intensified it. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that is the point where one could do the greatest service to the Vaishnavas, is there in Kurukshetra at that moment. Because at that point, their love for Krishna was the most intense. Because they were thinking, I'm so far, this Krishna isn't even the Krishna I love. So that mood of separation, and therefore, in separation, one wants to, one's love increases more, right? So this is why Mahaprabhu, he's chanting Juggernaut, Juggernaut, Juggernaut. He's saying, oh, hey, Lord, right? Like this at Ratha Yatra. Because he's trying to experience that mood the most fully. And he can experience that the most strongly with the distance that Aishvarya gives. Aishvarya creates the distance by which one can experience separation. Anyways, that was what Gaur Govinda Maharaj said. That's why Mahaprabhu is chanting the secondary name. Anyways, I was tangenting a little bit. So we have primary and secondary names. And Krishna has so many of them, right? So many names. So mercifully he has offered. He is, well, not offered. So mercifully Mahaprabhu has offered all of these names. And so with these names, we are in a very fortunate position, right? And what is this fortunate position? Again, to come to the Shikshashtakam. His Holiness Danodar Maharaj, he calls the Shikshashtakam the Kirtan Sutras. He says if we meditate on the Shikshashtakam, we will have all the guidance we need in order to truly and properly engage in Kirtan, right? They are the full understanding of all of the moods and all of the siddhantas we need in order to engage in the chanting of the holy name. So, what do we hear? Cheto darpanam marjanam, right? This is how the Shikshashtakam so famously begins, right? And what does it say? Cheto darpanam marjanam. The heart is being cleansed, the chitta, right? The chitta, the subconscious, if you will, right? The way that our consciousness is reflected into this world. It is being cleansed, right? Being cleansed of impurity, being cleansed of all of this dust that is accumulated after so many births, right? And of course, this is not something to quickly go past. It's making a very substantial point. Because Kardama Muni, he is engaged in so much meditation in order to be purified, in order to have darshan of the Lord, right? He has undergone all of these things, and everyone normally has to be, right? And yet, what are we hearing? When we are hearing about the glories of the holy name, we are not hearing one chants the holy name and then eventually Chaito Darpana Marjanam, right? That first text of the Shikshashtakam walks one through all the stages of one's devotional life. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he discusses this in Bhajan Rahasya. He talks about how the first text of the Shikshashtakam begins at the beginnings of one's spiritual life, and at the end, what do we hear? Pratipurnamrita Svadanam, right? We're hearing that we're hearing about the fullness of prem one is filled in, right? We recite in the morning the nectar for which we're always anxious for, right? We're immersed in that. So it begins at the beginning. And what is the beginning? That one is being cleansed of all of these things. This is a substantial point. And it's related to, again, the text we have discussed today, right? Because Kardama Muni and all these other individuals, they'll have to do all these things to be cleansed. Again, I was talking about the yoga ladder. What is the point of karma yoga in the yoga ladder, right? It is there for purification, right? Nishkama karma yoga is done for which purpose? In of itself, it doesn't do anything, right? When one performs Nishkama Karma Yoga, they're purified so that they can execute Jnana Yoga. Does that make sense? Because otherwise one cannot execute Jnana Yoga on their own, right? It's a purification process, right? So the whole goal of Karma Yoga is simply attained just by the chanting of Hare Krishna, right? It's almost a side effect, right? Chaito Darpana Marjanam, right? In this sense, we find that. We find that the chanting of Hare Krishna, that the execution of Bhakti Yoga, it is achieving instantly all of these other things, right? So mercifully, these holy names have manifested. So mercifully, we are able to chant these holy names, right? In order to be purified, in order to have what? This darshan of the Lord, right? Because this is what naturally follows. Then we hear, right, that the forest fire of suffering in this material world is also put out, right? Kleshagni. Again, what is the whole purpose of Jnana Yoga then? People are engaged in Jnana Yoga meditation so they can go into the Brahman effulgence, right? They can have Paramatma realization. Why do people hanker for those things? It's not that they're fun, right? I remember when I was little and my parents would tell me about Brahman realization, I'd find it scary, you know? It's like you're there in just blankness forever, right? Obviously not forever, you fall out because it's a bit boring. But it's a scary idea, right? But why do people do it? Why do people find it attractive? They find it attractive because it's ceasing their suffering, right? So the whole goal of the jnana process is because, well, I'm suffering, I don't want to suffer anymore. Better than suffering is not experiencing it all. And that's true. 0 is much more valuable than -1, right? 0 is much more valuable than -5. But all of that is coming simply at the beginning, right? Chaito Darpana Marjanam, Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, right? We're hearing about the cessation of all suffering. And of course we hear that this metaphor for forest fire is so often used for suffering. And this analogy of the forest fire is not used just for its poetic license. We hear it in Bhagavatam as well, at the beginning of 7th canto, in 11th canto as well. I'm sure in other places, but those are the ones that are coming to my mind right now, right? We hear that this analogy is used, and it's used very appropriately because we know how a forest fire starts, right? Sometimes it's caused by people, but sometimes it naturally happens, right? The trees, they will rub against each other, right? And then because of the friction, a flame will be created, right? Like the bamboo sticks together. We know this in 7th canto. Prabhupada, he has that purport where he describes this. And why is this appropriate? Because the Supreme Lord has not begun the fire, right? The Supreme Lord has not begun the sufferings of the material world. They're spontaneously created by the material world interacting among itself, right? All of the pains of this world are not blamable upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're blamable on the world itself, on all the jivas inside it that are trying to exploit each other and trying to exploit the world. And therefore, naturally, by that interaction, the forest fire is created. So it's a very fitting analogy because the issue is not created by anyone outside. It is an issue that is created among itself. But it is also fitting because the solution does not come from inside itself, right? A forest fire left out of control burns itself. It completely destroys itself. In order for the forest fire to end, water must come, right? In order for the forest fire to end, the rains must come, right? And so the rains must come and extinguish it. So it's a very apt description of our situation in the material world. We cause all our problems and we can't cause any of our solutions, right? There's one, in the Middle Ages, there was a Christian movement called the Puritans, and they were complete fundamentalists, right? Very interesting. That's why they were called Puritans, right? They said we need to purify the religion of everything, right? So you'll see, the Amish, they're not Puritans, but they're related to that movement. We need to just purify everything, and that's why they live very austerely, right? Very austerely they live. So anyways, the Puritans were like this, and they were if you read their stuff, it's like, it's Niyamagraha, right? All they do is they talk about how bad they are, right? They'll write these beautiful poems, such mastery of the English language, and all of it is like, I'm so bad, I'm a bad person, I'm so depressed, right? It's rather interesting, right? Which is, of course, a mood that we also should have, but there should also be some nectar there, right? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, if we focus too much on our failings and our sense control, we become impersonalists, right? We should realize there is nectar in the Supreme Lord. Anyways, but the Puritans is one line which I think of often whenever I think of this analogy. And he says, the only thing I contributed to my salvation was the sin that made it necessary in the first place. Which I thought was a very fitting point, actually, right? The only thing that actually was contributed on my end was that I created the situation where I needed to be put out of this material world in the first place. I didn't help myself out of this world. I'm not able to. I constitutionally can't, right? It is not my position to be able to. And this is the situation of the forest fire. The fire can't put out the fire, right? But then the rains can come and they can extinguish them. And what are the rains? The rains in the Shikshashtakam are quite clearly the holy names, right? Because the holy names, they're a descending process, right? We cannot speculate the holy names. The holy names, they descend like rainwater, right? In order to extinguish the forest fire of repeated birth and death, right? Of the sufferings of samsara. They come down. And so, again, this analogy is very fitting, right? Because the Supreme Lord mercifully reveals himself, right? Krishna doesn't need to do anything, right? That's the whole point of Leela. Leela is an expression of Krishna saying, I can do whatever I want, Sometimes people will say, oh, this is weird. How can you believe God is a boar, carrying the earth on his tusk? It's weird that you don't think that if God wanted to do that, he can't. You know what I mean? So, in this way, we can see the Leela, the whole point is that Krishna can do whatever he wants. And so mercifully, as part of doing whatever he wants, what does he do? He reveals those names which can disrupt the forest fire of conditioned life, of repeated birth and death. So in this way, the forest fire is a very fitting analogy. And so the Shikshashtakam, it gives some sort of methodology in order to escape it, right? And eventually, what does it say? As I said, eventually we see, what do we see in the Shikshashtakam? We see the fullness of those moods, right? That fullness of prem, right? Purna is what is described. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he actually says, Shreya Kairava Chandrika, right? The benediction moon. This is referring to ruchi. This is when taste arises, right? Because the moon reflects the light of the sun, and ruchi is like a reflected light of bhava, of prem, right? So it's the moon. What is that benedictory moon? It is that ruchi, that now there is taste to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now there is taste for His qualities. There is taste for this perfection, which is mentioned in the purport here, right? So all of this is coming so sweetly and nicely by doing what? By chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We've heard, right, how heavy this is, how intense it is. This part of Bhagavatam, if anything, is showing us, as many parts of Bhagavatam do, we think about, the austerities of Dhruva Maharaj. When I'm reading through Bhagavatam and I reach that section, I think I'll never complain about Ekadashi ever again, I'm thinking how much effort he's going through to see the Supreme Lord, right? And yet so simply, all of that, right, the Shikshashtakam is showing us. So simply, just by chanting all of these names, right? Just by chanting these names, what happens? We're able to attain all of these things. Because when our senses are absorbed in these things, then naturally Krishna will reveal himself. Naturally we'll be able to see Krishna, right? So simply. This is the glory of bhakti. And this is my concluding point. And so we hear this. It's sometimes said, we know in Vedic logic, I'm now forgetting the technical terms, but when you make a point, you'll present the thesis point, right? Then you'll express your doubt, then you'll hear a refutation of the doubt, and then you'll hear the conclusion. And this is, I only remember the refutation is Purvapaksha, but I can't remember the Sanskrit words for the other ones right now. And so we sometimes see that the Shikshashtakam is almost analyzed in this way, right? Because what do we hear? The thesis of the Shikshashtakam is these are the glories of the holy name, Chaito Darpanam Marjanam, right? This is the glory, the potency of the holy name, what the Nishkama Karma Yogi is working so hard to do instantly, it's coming. It's the initial phases of chanting Hare Krishna, right? So we're hearing this thesis, how gloriful the holy name is, right? It is filled with all these transcendental energies. But then what is the doubt? The doubt is, well, I'm so unfortunate, right? I'm so unfortunate. I'm not having any joy. And Mahaprabhu in his humility expresses this, right? I'm so unfortunate. I'm having no attraction, right? And that's the Purvapaksha. That's what's sometimes given in the analysis. That's the refutation he gives. So what is his issue? I'm still unfortunate. I still feel that I'm suffering in this world. Of course, we know Mahaprabhu wasn't, but right, in his pastime, he is expressing that mood, right? I'm still not feeling this joy, and this is, of course, at least I can relate to this, Sometimes I'm chanting, and I'm just chanting so I can get my 16-round vow done, right? Not that I'm happy about it, but sometimes it's like that, and I'm thinking, where is that? Where is the nectar that I'm so certain is there, right? Where is it? So that doubt is there. And then, naturally, then what is the Purvapaksha? The Purvapaksha is I have no attachment for this holy names, right? I have no attachment. That is why I am not feeling this joy, right? And then what is the Siddhanta? So in the first text, Chaito Darpana Marjanam, we hear this initial point, how relishable the holy name is. Then in the second text, we hear Mahaprabhu's humility comes out, and he's saying, oh, but I have no attraction, right? And then the Siddhanta comes in the third text. Why is this? Because Trinadapi Sunichena, Tarorapi Sahishnana, Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadaharihi. What is the resolution? What is the reason why, even though these glories are there, I'm not tasting them? It is because I'm not as humble as a blade of grass. It is because I'm not as tolerant as a tree. There's the flow of the Shikshashtakam, right? The glories of the holy name. Then the experience of why am I not relishing them? And then the solution, right? The explanation. Because surely it can't be false. We know it's so clearly described in Shastra as the glories of chanting the holy name. So the solution is there, that the humility is not there, right? The humility to chant is not present. And because that humility to chant is not present, therefore that taste is not coming, right? And why is this? Of course, there's so many reasons why, right? The false ego comes up all the time as there's something that gets smashed. But one explanation that's often given is at the heart of it, all of the anarthas in our chanting are born from pride, from a lack of humility, right? Why are we doing offenses? We're doing offenses to the Lord in our seva because we're thinking, I'm on the altar and everyone is here to watch me do the arti, right? I'm doing kirtan, and I'm doing kirtan because everyone wants to hear me sing the holy name, right? I'm giving Bhagavatam class, and everyone wants to hear me speaking, right? No, everyone is there because they want to hear about the glories of Krishna, right? Everyone is hearing a kirtan because they wish to hear the beautiful holy name. Everyone is engaging in the arti because they wish to see the worship of the Lord, right? But all of these offenses come up in one's seva because one's ego inserts itself there, right? And therefore, when anarthas are there, it's not that the holy name becomes affected, but one's ability to taste the holy name becomes affected. Why does one commit Vaishnava parad? Either one sees someone and they think this devotee is more advanced than me, and they think, oh, I wish I was at their position. I wish I was, getting respected and admired like them. Or they see another devotee and they think this devotee is lower than me, and then already the offense is committed, right? Because there, that pratishtha is there, right? The pratishtasha. The desire for prestige, the desire, right? Either the desire to think you are someone, the desire to become someone, or even worse, the idea that one already is someone. And because of that, all the other anarthas flow. And that is why that is the key to chanting, because all anarthas and offenses of the holy name come because one is thinking, oh, I am someone. I am someone chanting the holy name. And then when one is full of themselves, how can they taste the sweetness that is there, right? If a cup is filled with poison, you can't put any nectar into it, right? So because of this, it's sometimes described that is the resolution of that issue that Mahaprabhu raises. Anyways, I've hit 9 o'clock, so we'll end there. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.